Hello. Welcome to Story Hour with Miss Barbara. First, we'll have to light our candle. Fire spry, air spry, show to us your golden light. And we'll get into our storyboats. Mother of the fairy tale, sail me in your silver boat, sail me slightly afloat, mother of the fairy tale, take me by your silver hand, sail me to your shining land. There was once an old castle that was deep in a large forest. And in that castle there lived an old woman who was a witch. And she lived there all alone. During the day, she would turn herself into a cat or a screech owl. But after dark, she would return to her human form. And she had the power to call wild animals to her, and then she would roast them, boil them, and eat them. But if someone, a human, came within 100 paces of her castle, they would be frozen to the ground, unable to move until she released them. But if a young maiden came within that circle, she would be turned into a bird, and the old witch would put her into a wicker cage and carry her into a room in her castle where there were 7,000 cages of rare birds. Now, in that land, there was a young maiden by the name of Jorinda, and she had a young fellow named Joringel, a young handsome youth, and they had promised that they would marry each other. And so during this time before their wedding, they loved nothing better than to spend time together. And so one evening they went for a walk so that they could talk alone together in privacy and in peace. And they walked into the woods. And Jorinda began to feel very sad. And every once in a while she would weep. And sometimes she would sit down in the forest, in the sunlight streaming through, and feel sad. And Joringel felt sadness too. It was almost as though they were going to be dying, that kind of sadness. Well, it was a beautiful evening in the forest. The sun was just going down, and it was shining its last rays of light into the thick green woods and trees. And the turtle dove was singing its lament. Suddenly, Jorinda and Joringel looked around, and they noticed that everything looked unfamiliar. They must have gotten lost. And just then the sun was halfway under the mountain and halfway above. And then Joringel looked through the trees, and he saw that the castle was very close, and he felt terrible fear. And Jorinda was singing a song. My little bird with the necklace red sings sorrow, sorrow, sorrow. He sings that the dove must soon be dead for sorrow, so jump, jump, jump. And then Joringel looked around, and the sun had just gone down, and Jorinda wasn't there. She had turned into a nightingale. And a screech owl came out from the bushes and flew 3 times around the nightingale, screeching, "Hoo, hoo, 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 hoo." And then, just after the sun went down, the screech owl went into the bushes, and out came the old witch. And she looked yellow and lean, and her eyes were red, and her nose hung down over her chin. And she gathered up the nightingale with her fingers, with her long fingernails, and took her away. And Joringel couldn't move from the spot. He was stuck fast. He couldn't move hand or leg. He could not cry out. He could only watch her take his beloved away from him. And then finally, the old woman came back, and she said in a hollow voice, "Good evening, Zachiel. You may release him as soon as the moon touches the cave, Zachiel. Then you may release him." And then Joringel was free, and he fell down on his knees before the old witch and begged and pleaded and sobbed for the release of his dearest beloved, Jorinda. And all she would say was, "You will never see her again." And she left. So there was nothing for Joringel to do. He had to leave the forest, and he wandered until he came to a strange village where he had never been before. And he got a job there as a shepherd. And so he worked for a long time, watching the sheep, until one night he had a dream. And in that dream, Joringel found a blood-red rose that had a jewel in the heart of it. And he plucked the rose, and in his dream he took it to the castle, and everything he touched was freed from enchantment. And with it he was able to recover his beloved Jorinda. So the next morning, when Joringel awoke, he began at once to search for that special flower. And he searched far and wide, over hill and dale, day after day, for 9 days, and then on the morning of the ninth day he found it, a blood-red rose that had a large drop of dew in the center, as large as a pearl. And he picked the flower and carried it carefully day and night until he got back to the castle. And when he was within 100 paces of the castle, he stopped and he looked at the castle and he held his flower and he took a step and nothing happened. He took another step and he was able to keep going, and so he walked all the way to the door of the castle and he held the rose and touched the door of the castle and it sprang open, and he walked inside and looked around, walked into the entryway, and he was listening for the sound of bird song. And then he heard it. So he followed the song until he came to a large room filled with cages of birds. And there was the old witch feeding the birds. And oh, she was angry, very angry to see Joringel. And she came towards him, saying foul words and spitting foul things. But she could not come within 2 paces of Joringel, and so he totally ignored her and wandered into the room trying to find his beloved. And there he found hundreds of nightingales, and that was the one Jorinda had been turned into. But how would he tell which one was Jorinda? And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the witch secretly take one of the cages and head for the door. So Joringel sprang upon her and touched the cage with his red rose, and he also touched the witch, so that she would never have power over anyone again. And then there stood his lovely Jorinda, more beautiful than ever, and she had her arms clasped around his neck. And they were so happy to be together again. And so, after they had freed all the other maidens from their spells of enchantment and from their cages, Jorinda and Joringel went home together, and they lived a wonderful, long, happy life. And that's the story of Jorinda and Joringel. Let's blow out our story candle. And thank you for listening.